Hey guys, and today we're going to do a walkthrough of a website that I've been working on and developing, and just kind of talk about it, look through some of the choices I made, look through some of the technologies used, and just kind of talk about it. And now I've got a couple of things to say before we start doing that. First, I am really sorry for the lack of videos. It's been over a month since I last uploaded a video, and I am really sorry about that. I've just been super busy with work, and I still am, so I don't know what the next video is going to be, but all I can tell you is that I'm trying my best to get content out for you guys. The next thing is, the whole reason why I'm doing this video is actually a result of a school project. As part of my college computing course that I'm doing for my A-levels, which is kind of the in UK equivalent of high school. Part of the computing course I'm doing for my A-levels dictates that you produce a website. So obviously I didn't want to use the graphical tools that they provided. I wanted to code my own website. So that's what I've done, and I think the result is pretty nice. The fact that it was a school project, and obviously, in order for you to get the qualifications, you have to satisfy certain criteria. In this case, some of them quite ridiculous, quite frankly, but there we go. That's the world we're living in, and that's what you have to do. So throughout this, we're going to talk about some of the bad decisions I made and kind of why I had to make them kind of pursuant to the criteria. So that's what we're just going to dig into. Now, I first want to say that in this screencast, we're gonna a lot of what we're gonna focus on is browser support, because this website has to work in IE6, IE8, because again, rightly or wrongly, IE8 is what we get examined in. So it has to kind of look its best, or at least a variant of its best in IE8. So there you go, there you have it. How we're going to be testing for IE8. I'm on a Mac here, so obviously we don't have native Internet Explorer, thankfully. But we still need to test it. So how are we going to do that? Well, this is one thing I'm just going to kind of introduce right away. If we pop open Firefox here, there's this service called Browser Stack, where you can it's a virtual machine service, so you can run virtual machines of all the different versions of IE, and you access it from your browser. They give you developer tools and things like that as well. I'm on the free plan, which you get a 60 minutes browser usage to try things out. See here, I've got 39 minutes left, but we're only gonna have a quick look, so that should be fine for these purposes. Obviously, I've got the most recent versions of all the key browsers you can get for OS 10 on here, so we're going to use them, of course, as well. Just quickly, because some people have different opinions on what browsers to use. This website should support, I kind of aim to support IE8 and up, Safari, Firefox 3.6 up, Safari 3 up, or versions of Chrome and kind of the modern version of Opera, because as we'll see, Opera is shockingly almost just as bad as IE, and there's less you can do about Opera, so arguably Opera is kind of a bigger issue than IE, but those are the browsers that I chose to support. So let's get looking at. I've tried to do this video before, and I was kind of in a quandary about how to start it, what I think we'll do first is look at a page and then talk about the code that powers it. So I think we'll just start off with Firefox here. That's my failsafe. Obviously, like I said, we're going to look at it in other browsers, but we're just going to start off with Firefox because everyone kind of has a development environment that they prefer. So if I just drag on the site's index file here, which is obviously the home page, we're going to get to looking at this code a little more later. There we go. So, looking at this page, and this is, I chose to use the home page because this is representative pretty much of all the pages on the site, and other than the ones with the specific technologies, we've got a H1 tag at the top that says, no, I'm not going to talk about the code. Start off with, I'm going to talk about what's actually on there. We've got a H1 tag. Oh no, we've just got a title that says WebDev Clubhouse because I decided to do my website about web development, so I called it the WebDev Clubhouse. We've got a navigation bar that has hover events for all the links. We've got a little blue bar, and then we've got the page title, home, the page description, and this is a little bit unique to this website. I wanted to separate out the features that the website can offer, so I added some hooks to target them individually. We've got a sidebar of links because one of the things it dictates is you have to have external links on your page to make sure I got those in. We've got a sidebar of links. Now, and then we've got just a repeat of the navigation bar down below. So if it's a tall article, you don't have to scroll all the way to the top. If you're closer to the bottom, you can just scroll to the bottom. So that kind of shows you what a standardized page looks like. We'll just look at the code for that quickly, I think. We'll start off looking at the markup and then we'll look at the CSS separately later. So, hang on, before we look at that, there was another thing I wanted to show you here. This website is fluid width. As you can see, the text changes to accommodate different width. It's kind of a hip thing to do these days, and makes use of the massive variety of screen state. If we get too small, what a mobile device would be, the layout completely changes to accommodate more for a mobile device, and I'll talk about some of the kind of thinking behind this, but just looking at the design, you can see we've got these bigger navigation items, and the sidebar shifted to the bottom, and we've actually got rid of the footer because with these big navigation items, you don't need a repeat of it in the footer, and so that same type of transformations happens with all the pages on the site when they get into a mobile mode. Let's now get to looking at the HTML that powers it. Open up TextMate, And a couple of things of note, you can see we're using HTML5 here, and because we're using HTML5, we don't have to use a complicated char set declaration. We can just say meta char set equals whatever the char set is, and in this case it's UTF-8. That the distinction between this desktop interface and the mobile interface is done by something called media queries, and oddly enough, the iPhone and some versions of Android don't actually respect media queries until you put this meta tag of viewport in. So that's what this is. It shouldn't need to be there, but it's perfectly valid, and it just makes it work. The media query basically says to the screen, only tell the browser engine that you're as wide as you can be. Don't be any wider than you can be. So it's kind of a weird concept there, but that's what that does. We've got a style sheet link, and that's another thing I'll talk about on this. There's no distinction between screen and print styles. Normally I would do that, but one of the specific stipulations by the exam board is that to get a distinction on the course which you A, you have to it has to print exactly as it shows on the screen. So because of that, we're not specifying a media screen. Then because we're using HTML5, like we discussed above, we have to load this HTML5 sim thing, which is only needed for IE, but make sure we can style HTML5 elements, otherwise they would have no style. It recognises elements that it doesn't know about, but it doesn't let us style them. Also, it's kind of infamously known that Internet Explorer doesn't respect CSS in the way that a lot of other browsers do, so we load this style sheet just for IE if we're in IE, and this code is a version of a comment by Microsoft, so stuff within these parameters only applies in IEs, so you can put anything there, but in this case we're just loading a script and we've got a style sheet link. Then we open our body element, which is obviously what people can see. We've got an anchor link, and it links to an element on the page called primary content. That's what this hash symbol is. It's got a class of skip, so we can target it in CSS later, and it says scroll to main content. That kind of does what it says on the tin, and it's not just for mobile devices, it's for people that use screen readers, so that they don't have to listen to the screen reader saying the navigation every single time. Before they get to the navigation, they can just say skip to content, so they can get directly to the page content and don't have to read all the navigation. So that's kind of cool. We've got a div with an ID of header. One other thing was there is a HTML5 element just called header, but because we're loading this JavaScript to make HTML5 work in those older browsers, if a user doesn't have JavaScript, if we use the header element, it won't look right. So I was very careful about choosing when to use HTML5, and it's only sprinkled right in a few places. So we've got a div of ID header, we've got which produces this black area here and this this border at the bottom. you can see that this this area stretches as wide as the browser window can, and so does the one in the footer, because we want to because we want that to happen. We can't wrap it all in a single wrapper. We have to have separate wrappers, so that's what this div ID inside's about. Then we've got the H21 element, which wherever you are on the page takes you back to the home page. That's this element here. A lot of people now have different opinions on what tags are most important, what should really be in the H1 tag for search engine reasons, but I just feel like it should still be the H1. We've then got this nav element, which it is a HTML5 element, but all the styling, when we look at the CSS, is applied to the unordered list here. So we get the semantic benefits of having an element wrapped in nav, saying this is navigation, but we kind of hold on to the styling. So we've got an unordered list, and it's just got the links that you see there. The only kind of thing of relative importance is you see the home page has got the, you can tell it's the current page, and if we go into another if we go onto another page, you can tell that that's now the current page. Yeah? So that's applied with the class of current that's applied to a different there's some each time. So we're gonna look at that in the CSS later, how that's used, but we're giving ourselves that hook so we can use it later. Next we've got our page title in our H2. In this case it's home. We've got a paragraph of text here, and this is where it starts to get interesting, at least on this page anyway. Hang on guys. So yeah, as I was saying, this where it starts to get interesting. That bulleted list of links is an unordered list with a class of featured line. This is interesting because you'd normally apply. You wouldn't apply a class name to something like this because there's no semantic reason for it to have a class name. It doesn't tell us anything extra about the element than what we can get in the list item. The idea of HTML is you describe but you don't specify. Got that from Chris Collier. That's a great description. You describe but you don't specify. So why have we got these classes here basically telling us what we can already get in the element? Well, it's because I wanted to apply different colours to each element just a design decision that I made. Now I could have used a nav kind of env child thing, but I decided that probably wasn't the best idea, seeing as that probably isn't supported in IE8, and that's what I'm support for. there we end the main content area. Then we have the aside element. It's I could have used an actual aside element rather than a div of ID aside, but I decided to do that because, again, for the same reason, it's a structural element. So if users don't see the styling that's applied to it, that would be pretty significant setback here. So when we actually look at the what we've got is a wrapping div, because I wanted to have that grey box styling, so that's what targets that. Within it we've got a H4 tag, because this isn't a very important thing on the page, so I chose a H4 tag. Still a heading, but I don't think it deserves a H3. Those are kind of reserved for within articles. And then we've got an unordered list again, because it's a list of links, but there's no order to the list. And you have to have external links in your website. So here we've just got links to other websites. And then we close out on this. We've then got a div of ID footer, which we've then got a div of ID footer, which just has a repeat of the navigation with exactly the same markup. But notice this time we don't have to have a div of ID inside. We just go straight to the navigation element. That's because these links can just be set with text lines centrally. They don't have to follow the flow of the page. So we're kind of covered the ambit, and if you look, all the pages kind of follow that same format. So I'm not going to go through and show you each one of the pages, because I've got other things to do tonight, and we'll be here kind of all day. But those, you can see that it's carried through, and what we get from there. Let's talk about what do I have next on my list. The contact form, because how you deal with forms is kind of interesting in HTML5. So let's go over to the contact form. Let's look at some of the behaviour. Well, it's just kind of a generic form with boxes and a larger send button, so it's kind of nice there. But it does have some special features. For one thing, you notice as I hover over one of these fields, it says please fill out this field. That's saying this field is required, and that's browser level validation that's supported in HTML5. That's not server level, that's just on the browser. Less robust as doing it on the server, but it's still there, and it's just kind of an extra nice benefit. So, something else I forgot to mention, every page apart from the home page has this breadcrumb to kind of show you where you've come to get to that page. So this is a second level page, so there's nothing behind there. But if we look at the contact page, we can see that that breadcrumb is wrapped in a navigation element because it's a form of navigation. This time it's an ordered list because it goes in the order that you can, so it makes sense for it to be an ordered list. And it's just list items separated by this little piece of text midod, and midod is the URL entity for the UTF-8 entity for that tiny little dot that you see there. So that's what separates them. Whether that was a good choice to do it in the markup or whether we should have done it in the CSS kind of debatable. We could have used pseudo elements, but because of the kind of increased browser support, I didn't really want to do that. We have a form which is obviously the whole wrapping form tag. It has a method of post which is just a server-side thing. It doesn't make any difference to behavior. Then we have an action URL to an action in the same directory, a PHP file, which we'll get looking at in a minute. But we have an action URL. That stuff's unique to all forms. Each form element has a wrapping element to wrap it in, and each form element has a label, say what it is. This is very important semantically, and a input. I'm just gonna leave that there for a minute, and you might want to pause the video and take in what's common against all of them, because there's some kind of important stuff here that I don't want to go over because it will just take too long. This video's taken a long time as it is. One thing to note is that they've all got this required piece of text on them. You write it like an attribute, but it doesn't have a value. Kind of funny concept if you've been working with HTML for a long time and you're working with HTML5. We have autofocus as well on the first field that as soon as this page is loaded, when in a supported browser, as soon as the page is loaded, that field will be focused. So you see how that works. As soon as I load the page, the first field is focused. So just a bit of usability stuff there. We've got in HTML5 each element is wrapped in a block level element, so that's quite important. And then we do another HTML5 required attributes to say you have to enter something into this field. Don't let it be submitted blank. And then we have an input of type of submit and a value of send. That's what's producing this big send button. When we click send, what happens? Well, it goes to this contact handler.php file. Now, before I talk about this, or before I show you, I just want to talk about some of the philosophical reasons why I did this. A lot of time when you're making a form, you will put the PHP in the same. Let me explain this better. To send a message to someone, which is what this form needs to do, you have to be able to use a server-side technology. You can't just do it in your browser. That doesn't work. It has to have the cooperation on the server. So the language that I most often use to do that is PHP, and PHP doesn't run locally unless you're on a server. You can't run it. So what that all means is, or maybe we can try this. When I try to run this file in Firefox. I'll just do that for you again. Try and run this file. So I'm opening it in the same way as you would if you click the link. Unless it's on a server, a browser doesn't understand PHP, so it won't load this page. The form won't work and the page won't load. So because I'm doing a lot of testing locally and it needs to work locally, I wanted to separate out those two files so that the website still worked viewing it locally. So that's what I'm doing. Another thing here is when somebody does something, if you have to send it, we use the output element to contain the output, and that's another HTML5 element, and we just have this class of issue and success to give it some different text styling. Using the output element is kind of subjective in this context because I think the spec for HTML5 says that the point of the output element is to show the output of a calculation, the output of direct processing. But I would argue that this is an appropriate use for the output element as well, because it shows the output of the form and output from the process, whether the form was successful or not. So I'd argue that this is an appropriate use for it. What other pages do I have open to show you here? We've got this is an article page, so something with a bit more meat to it, and just shows this article. We're kind of at the right place here, because what is unique about this, apart from having a load of text, is this thing here, this big audio element. Now, the part of the specification dictates you have to have multimedia elements in your work, like audio and video. So, most audio players require a combination of JavaScript and Flash, but in HTML5 we have this audio element, so you can just display the content directly, just like you would with an image or anything like that. So that's what this audio element is. It's what's producing that audio player there. Again, this is only supported in modern browsers, and we'll talk about the fallback for IE in just a second. Notice that I could have just said controls on this attribute because it's a HTML5 attribute, but you can still put the value. That's cool if you're more comfortable with that. I know I was, so that's why I chose to do it there. I know that these source tags, these go with HTML5 because HTML5 is an experimental standard. Browser vendors implement the technology in very different ways, which is something you'll definitely see in a minute. So WebKit browsers have taken it on themselves to support MP3s, and Mozilla-based browsers like Firefox and some other stuff have taken it on themselves to support OGG files. So it'll look for the source elements, and the browser will kind of decide which one it's going to use. We're also defining the type it is, just so it knows and doesn't have to look at the file. Now, actually, let's look at the behavior of that first. I'm just going to turn up. Just put my audio on very quietly there, because you can see we've got a functional player just from embedding that one element. So we've got play buttons, we've got a progress bar, we've got a duration, we've got a volume. I'm only going to play a little bit of it, but this is actually a transcript of the article, because, as I said, you had to include multimedia elements in your work. So this is what I chose to do. This is how it displays in Safari. We'll see how some kind of other browsers do it in a minute, but this is how it displays in Firefox. So let's just hit play and hear that it does indeed work. So I don't know if you're going to hit that, but you do see that we have indeed got play and pause buttons, and we have got sound that works. So that's really nice. This anchor link is just a link directly to the file that will display if the browser doesn't understand all this audio stuff, because it looks for the first thing it does understand, and every browser will understand a link. So that's all got that there, and it just links directly to the MP3. We've got a class of source audio file, which we'll talk about in a minute, and you may have seen in another video. Another thing I kind of wanted to talk about here is how I chose to approach. Well, for one thing, you can see within the text we've got these abbreviation elements, which are underused, but they're supposed to be used. It's the semantic thing to do. Anyway, you've got a abbreviation. You're supposed to use the abbreviation element. So, in Firefox here, they're indicated by that dash line. But if you hover over it, I'm struggling to find where I put one now, but I know that there is one somewhere. Oh, here we are in Firefox, indicated by that little dash line, and when I hover over IE, we get Internet Explorer as a pop-up down there. So that's kind of a nice accessibility thing that we get for visually impaired users, and that's just literally an inline element with an abbreviation and the title of what that abbreviation means. So just kind of a semantic level element. We've got another thing I want to show you is we've got down at the bottom we've got figure elements, or we've got these captions now. In the past, this might have been accomplished with a div ID image to get this grey box, and we'd have the image inside of that div, and we'd have a paragraph element to indicate this caption. But now there's a specific element for describing things that have diagrammatical importance. So let's find out. The element's called figure, and what you do is put the figure element, and then inside it is whatever you're trying to describe. Most often it's an image, and then you have the figure caption. Here now, you can put anything in there, but it's meant to be something of kind of diagrammatical importance. So you'll see in some later pages I've not used it. Notice that the use of the figure elements should not replace the use of alt text. Alt text is still very important for legacy browser support and things like that. So I've put alt text in there. Now notice I've put image of. A lot of people, when they do alt text, they think it's okay to describe what's actually in the image. I find it's better to say in the alt tag that it's an image, because some screen readers won't tell you that it's actually an image. They'll literally just say what's in the alt tag, so it can get a bit confusing. That's where the difference comes in between theoretical accessibility and real accessibility. So that's what I wanted to show you on kind of a standard article page. Let's get looking at what do I have next in my box of tricks.
It's 21:30.
This is an interesting one. This is a website about web design. So when I was kind of filling out the design brief for it, one of the things I said it was gonna be used for is because I was gonna have a section of code snippets. Obviously, if you're having code snippets, one of the things a lot of websites have is code highlighting, and I wanted to have that as well. So if you go into the thing, you see that the different areas of the code are indeed highlighted. Now, these are just wrapped within, and this is true for anywhere on the website. These are just wrapped within pre-tags, and every unique element that needs unique styling has a span wrapped around it. And you notice we've not used the kind of we've not used the like square brackets here. We've used the actual HTML representation of them, so that we get they actually display, and they don't display the element we're describing. So that was kind of interesting there. Now look, just talking about behaviour. Look at the scroll bar here. It scrolls way out. This is one of the reasons I incorporated a fluid design, because if we look down here, for instance, at the CSS, we've got a scroll bar on the CSS. But if we make the browser window bigger, if your monitor is big enough, you can get rid of that scroll bar and actually just copy the whole thing out. But the scroll bar is there because obviously we still want to make that data accessible for people with small screens. So that's true for that kind of process in true for all the code snippets, and later on we'll look at how stuff is targeted and kind of works. So let's now take a butcher's at that CSS that, oh no, sorry, we're just gonna have a quick look at the just gonna pop this over. We're just gonna have a quick look at the FAQ page, because as you see, there are some interesting things to talk about there. So I wanted to have kind of a glossary of common web terms, because you have to have interactive features in your work, and what I figured I'll just do a up and down slider with jQuery, so when you click something it slides down, and when you click it slides back up. So I just do definitions of different terms. You notice up here I've got a thing, so if you're on a low resolution monitor, you can just skip down and it'll skip down to that area without you having to scroll there. Very helpful if you've got all the things expanded. So how do we pull that off? Well, for that navigation, that's actually wrapped in another nav element. It's a form of navigation, so it deserves a nav element. We've got all the categories here. We've got a thing that says when you click this, jump to a div of ID, or the element with an ID of basic. It's an inbuilt browser capability. So that's the reason for having these section elements to separate off all of our sections here, our distinct sections, so that we can have something to target with those links and actually jump down to sections. I thought the HTML5 terms section was appropriate here, and they've all got unique IDs, of course. IDs are always unique. Now, an interesting thing we should talk about here is I'm using the definition list because to display all these elements, because they're lists of definitions, so I feel like that's the most semantic thing to do. But why didn't I apply the ID to the list item and to the definition list and use that to target? Well, it's because I wanted to have this heading element of the category name, so, and I wanted that to be part of what it scrolls down to. And then within those we've just got definition term elements, which just describe what you're defining, and then definition data elements, I call them. Not sure what their actual name is, but I think it's definition data that actually tell you what that term means. So definition lists are underused, but this is a perfect use for them. So we're exploiting the chance to use it. But you notice you don't see all those definition terms. That's going to be something interesting later when we get to talk about the JavaScript. So you see, we just got all these definitions, and then we've got the sidebar again, and the footer, and just below the footer we call two JavaScript files. One from Google, which is the jQuery library. It's kind of the hot way to do it these days. Just link it right from Google. And then my custom script that's built on jQuery, which might as well just look at now, seeing as actually, we'll leave it for a minute. But that's what hides the data and turns it into links that we can actually click on and expose the data that we need. So how are we going to actually do that? Well, that is an interesting question, and sorry, I just got sidetracked there. Something happened in the room. The answer is we're going to use jQuery, but we're going to get to that when we get to the jQuery part of it, because this is not all jQuery based. So we've gone through pretty much all the distinct features of the site. So and we've talked about why they've been used in the way they have. But then we need to get to CSS. But one inconsistency that I keep forgetting to mention is if you go to one snippets page, I think it's this one. You actually get some extra text in the sidebar over here that we didn't talk about before. It says these pages are controlled by third parties. Clicking the links will open a new browser instance. Now, this concept is something interesting. Now, it's heavily discouraged in today's web communities because having links open new tabs all the time just gets irritating for users. So we generally don't do it anymore. But that it's stipulated in the marketing criteria. Sorry guys, I'll be back in a minute. It's okay. So and you notice we've got syntax highlighting on that particular page as well. Now, if we go and look at how I've chosen to describe that, if we go on the page and look at how I've wrong one. You'll notice I've described it with a small tag. Now, if you know anything about HTML, you know that it's not a good idea to be using elements with presentational names like that to describe content. HTML shouldn't have anything to do with style. It should have to do with content. So why have I used a tag like small? Now this is a philosophical change in 8.5. The small and big elements have now taken on. They sound presentational to hear small and big. You think, well, that implies how it looks, but in HTML5 it actually doesn't. It's actually one of the many tools to talk about how important this element is. So saying wrapping this content in a small tag kind of says this is extra information, but it's not as important as a paragraph. So I felt that small was the semantic thing to use there. That text should be on all pages, but I've not. It depends how I decide to approach that in the final version. Let's what have we not looked at? Let's now look at the CSS that powers this. Now I'm just gonna go through all this very quickly because there's a lot here, and we could get bogged down by it. Now we have this margin padding reset. That's a standard reset. We're saying we're gonna set all the margins and paddings. We're not gonna let the browser set them to try and get a bit more consistency cross browser. We're setting the font size on the body element now. It's a bit weird to have a percentage as the font size, but what that actually means, and I don't know why this means it, but it does, is I'm using M's on this site, which is kind of an older technique, but it's for accessibility reasons. I'm defining all my sizes in M's. Now, M's is a relative term. It's relative to the size of the parent element, and the distant parent element of every element on the page is a body element. So we're setting at that level that the font size always equals 6.5%. And what that means is if you times it by 10, you'll get the pixel value. So if I put 1.2 m, it means 12 pixels. So it's just kind of a nice way to describe them. We've got a thing here that says all images, the max width is 100% now. Now, that is kind of weird thing, because you're going to say, of course, the maximum you can be is 100%, but that's not actually the case. If we go to somewhere where there's an image, and we resize the browser window, that element will now be bigger than the browser window, but we don't want it to cause scroll, wherever possible. We just want it to work nicely through design. Now, setting max width of 100% isn't a foolproof solution, because you can see as we narrow the browser window, it's only the width that changes, and it doesn't change the height, so it kind of loses its aspect ratio when we resize it. I'm not going to talk about the typography, because that's basically just standard stuff, and we need to get motor in here. The one thing I'm going to talk about is the code element, and we're using this for, we're using pre-tags for like blocks of code with syntax highlighted, but we're using the code element to actually show bits of code and sentences. So we're just giving it a bit of styling. We're saying the background is a very light grey, and we're just giving it a border to set bits of code apart from us. We're giving the header and the footer elements. We're setting what's constant between them. We're saying they've all got a background of this close to black. It's not black, but it's close to black. They've got white text in them, and they've got padding of 10 pixels. And then we're setting what's unique about the header and the footer. The height's slightly different, and one's got border on the top and one's got border on the bottom. we're saying wrapper and inside because they need to have the same width. Now this is an important consideration with fluid width elements. Now we're setting the width to 90%. This is kind of a new technique, and it means this the whole website basically should only occupy 90% of the browser window. Now because our relative widths are set as percentages, this allows the content to reflow and isn't just a fixed width. It can reflow and reaccommodate the space of the window, but we want some space around it, so we set we don't set width equals 100% because I've just said we want some centering and some space, and we set minimum and maximum width. Now these are important because my monitor, it's not that resolution now, but my monitor has a resolution of 2560 pixels, and on big resolutions like that, we don't want it just to keep spreading out and out, otherwise it's just going to look ridiculous. So we set a maximum width that it can be. So even if the maximum width is more than 1440 pixels, the max you can be and calculate your width based on, you have to be 1440 pixels. You can't be any wider than that. We're also setting a minimum width. That's because as we get down and down and down for media queries, that's the minimum width, because as you can see the scroll bar. Now that looks like now, but I had some issues in Opera where I didn't have a minimum width set, and the because of the percentage widths, the title would go on to 2 lines, and because I've set that this header can't expand, the title was breaking out of the header area, so that looks awful. So you've only got a tiny bit of scroll, but that's why I have a minimum width set. And then if you get much smaller than that, a media query kicks in. So then we have set that the primary content, which is the main content section, the column that shows on the left, is floated to the left, and it has a width of 75% of that, of whatever the value for that 90% is that we had set before. So this has, the content area has 75% of the 90% of the browser window. I realise that's a little confusing, but that's the way it is. We have the navigation element set to display block, and this is important because we're using HTML5, and even though we're using that bit of JavaScript, not all browsers are going to recognise that, and if a browser doesn't know what an element is, it will render it as display in line, but this contains a block level element, so we're setting it to display block. I'm not gonna go into any of this other stuff because we need to hurry up a bit. that link at the top of the page with class of skip, we've got a text indent on it that's crazy, and whatever need we're saying, it can't overflow it because position absolute whatever. What this is saying is we don't want to be able to see it on the page, but we can't just set just plain none, otherwise it won't be there for screen readers, because screen readers do actually respect CSS to some degree anyway. This is the styling for the sidebar. We're setting float right instead of I'm just giving it its percentage. The styling for the header, we've got a fallback font. Actually, no, we haven't got a fallback font. It's just Garamond, but it inherits a fallback font from the body, which we'll look at in a minute. We've got the styling for that contact form. We're saying if that output element has a class of issue, which we saw on the other page, make it red. If it has a class of status, make it green. This form element class are the divs, the boxes that surround each group of elements. They've just got a border on them, some padding and some margin. Whatever. There you go. That border is created by those elements. We're setting the labels to display blocks, so you get a bolder thing there. We're setting the input text area to a font size of 22 pixels now. That just kind of a trendy technique, gives you a bigger idea of what input you've typed in. Similar with this big send button to make it very, very clear to people what we want them to do. Those fields also have a max width of 100%. Now, this is a bit strange again, but you'll notice as our media query takes effect, what happens is those elements are only as wide as they can be. They don't stretch out. Normally, what would happen is the font element would stretch out a bit, and it was causing a horizontal scroll that wasn't looking very nice. So we just set the max width to 100%, and that's what took care of that. Now, a quick note: max width isn't supported in IE, which is something I might have to think about later for the fluid width design, but right now it's not too big of a deal. And then we just have all the individual styles for all the elements here, all the syntax elements. Now, notice I have my CSS organised nicely in terms of priority tier. We've got really basic stuff here. We've got the typography, we've got the structure, and then as things go on, we get less and less specific. But there's all the stuff for the syntax highlighted there. And then we have the adaptive queries that say, these are called media queries. So if you're on a screen and you're less than 640 pixels, which is probably on a phone. So, and again, this is only in supported browsers. So this is a width of less than 640 pixels, and it's on a screen. So these CSS attributes are applying. We say get rid of floats on the primary content. So the sidebar just kicks down to the bottom. Make the header as tall as it needs to be. Allow the allow the site to be as wide as it wants, be as wide as it possibly can be. Reduce font sizes a little bit. Make the list items display a block. That's what gives us this nice wide clickable area that spans the entire thing. This is debatable whether this is a good idea or not, because it's making a large clickable area that we can easily click with our finger, but it's also causing a lot of scrolls. So that's kind of why we have that skip to content element in there. We've got just some things to reduce the size of different typographical elements, and we get rid of the footer. We just on such a small screen we don't need to see the footer. We also set iframes to a width of 100%. Now, what does that mean? Well, I have some YouTube videos embedded on this site, and iframes have static widths that you apply to them. But those aren't good on responsive sites because, again, they stick out. So how we apply that? Well, we're just saying width equals 100%. That will only change the width. It will screw up the aspect ratio, which is why they're not used all that much, but we are using them in this case. So that's what you get from most mobile devices. If you're on a screen that is very very tall, but for some reason you just
22 hours.
Have a small width, you still get this, but this skip to content. If you're on a very tall browser, the skip to content thing shouldn't be there. So if I not sure if I'll be able to do it, but if I make this browser if I take I can't show you on this screen resolution. I'm shooting the screencast out, but that basically says if you're up to a certain height, don't show the content, and only if you're not up to that height, only then show it. Then we have some I'm not sure if I'm going to step through all this, to be honest, because it's going to take too long. One important thing that is to know is we have this audio focus element now. Firefox was getting a weird issue where when you played the audio, you were getting a weird outline. So I just have audio when it has focus when you're using it set that there's no outline, but I think that's the only really interesting aspect of that. Next we have, well, I'll just show you a couple of things that were happening in IE. This list was having some really nasty indentation in it, actually, because even though the bullets weren't displayed, the indentation of them was still displayed. So we just set this position outside, and again this CSS only applies to IE. And we also set links in the header to be display of inline block. Now, what does that mean? Well, because because these links are displayed in Ryan, Internet Explorer has some weird rules that it can't show underline to elements that are display level within lines. So I was having you didn't get this hover functionality or the current text, and that's a pretty important feature of the site in my opinion. So I want to make sure you have that. So what we do is set display inline block. This isn't actually an approved CSS value for the attribute display, but it works. It works fine, and it's only applied to IE, so it's not too big of a deal. Let's now talk about that jQuery that makes the fact that we set a variable of cur. We get all the definition data elements, which if you rewind this game cache, you'll see that all the actual definitions were inside definition data elements. So we get all them and we hide them. You can't understand, but we get all them and we hide them. We wrap them in links, which is what gives us this link behavior. They're not links by default because they don't link anywhere, so there's no reason for them to be links. But we wrap them in an empty link just to give us that functionality. We say when they're clicked, prevent what the default action is, so it doesn't try and open up another page. Go to the parent element, which is this will target the appropriate definition and slide toggle it. So when we click it the first time, hide it. When we click it the first time, show it. And when we click it the next time, hide it. So just a simple jQuery snippet there. And then we have some code down here to say when we find a link that has an external link on it, find that and add that attribute target underscore blank. Now that's just adding a HTML attribute. If we look at where that's if you look at an external link, that's just adding an attribute of target underscore blank. Now we can add this in the HTML. It's just a HTML attribute in HTML5 for good reason. This is an invalid attribute because it's a bad practice. But I need to do it for the course, so I wanted to dynamically apply them via jQuery and not have them in the markup. So that's why that's in there. For that reason, I may end up having to include jQuery on all the pages, which is something I really don't want to do, but there you go. So we've kind of stepped through step by step all the code, and we've seen how this website works in Firefox, but as we know, we need to do cross-browser testing, so let's not really look at it because I already know there's nothing wrong because I already tested it. But let's just have a quick look in some other browsers just to be sure. So let's try it in Chrome. A lot of things run on WebKit, so everything displays properly. I think that's just a default setting we have to be. I'll check on the view menu, but I think that's just a bit of a weird default. Yeah, that was just a setting inside the browser itself. An interesting thing to look at here is how Chrome handles audio elements. Every because it's an experimental standard, every browser handles HTML5 elements slightly differently. So this is how this browser handles the audio element. But as we can see, it's still entirely functional. So that's nice there. Similarly, if we look at the contact form which try and submitting, it has different levels of validation. It validates the field individually, so just something kind of different there. But the display in Chrome is fine, really. We're not going to check Safari because just take my word for it. I've already checked Safari. It's fine. This screencast is getting long enough. But one of the things we really should check is Opera, because, like I said at the beginning, Opera has some weird displays of some things. And we can see that right away, really. These lines are more pronounced between each area, and the typefaces are different. This is actually Arial, and that's not Garamond like it is in all other browsers on the Mac, pretty much. That's Arial. We've got there's a bit more space between the areas. So we see Opera displays a little differently, but I don't think it's a massive issue. Let's look at how Opera handles audio. We've got a slightly different player as we did with all of them, but it's still equally functional. I don't really have a preference on how. But see, we can play it and it all works fine. So Opera gets the seal of approval, although it's not as good as other browsers. Let's now look at Internet Explorer, and this is where Browser Shop comes in. So let's go on to Browser Shop, and I have a account here, so I can try account, so, and I've got the where we're just ready up here. So let's test in. Let's look at it in IE6. Although, like I said, not supported in IE6, but just for fun, let's look how awful it is in IE6. Sorry guys, just let me do this a second. Hopefully that should work. And we'll just look at the index page, for example. So remember, this is IE6. and it doesn't actually look too bad. It doesn't look that much worse than Opera. Let's make it smaller and look at how it handles resizing. See, IE6 can get as tiny as it wants to, and I'm still displeased because it has some issues there, so, and it doesn't respect minimum width, so it doesn't know when to stop resizing. I might have to reset some stuff there, but in general, I think that's okay. Obviously, there's no HTML5 stuff, so if we go onto and you see what I was talking about with the kind of the bigger see how there's a bigger gap between all the elements, and the fonts are a little rougher, but I'm pleasantly surprised at how that's done. Let's look at it in IE8, which I intentionally supported. Yeah, so we've still got the bigger thing, but the gap's gone, and we've got the underline on the navigation items like we talked about. Let's look at what it does for. Because this doesn't support HTML5 either, so let's look at what they are. It loads that image. So we'll talk about. This is actually a sprite, so when you hover over it, it just moves it up. So look at the previous video for some guidance on that. So it looks fine in IE7, and let's look at if it has the same problem with the maximum width. It shouldn't do. Yeah, so when it gets below a certain level, it doesn't try and make it smaller. It just creates a scroll bar, which is kind of a nicer behaviour, I think, than trying to get super small. So we've looked at designing lots of browsers. We've kind of gone through every element of the code that I thought was important. That's been a good walkthrough of the site, I think. Definitely post your comments on anything I could have improved. I'm certainly interested to know what you guys have to say about this. I think anything to do with semantics and kind of accessibility it's always open for discussion. So definitely chime in with anything you have to say. the next screencast I'm going to be doing should be me converting my website from fixed to fluid width, so that should be interesting. Anyway guys, thanks for watching this video. Sorry it was super long, but I hope you've enjoyed it. Bye bye.